In the era of self branding, therapy talk, and online enlightenment, the ego has become a fashionable villain. It's blamed for our need for validation, our social media addictions, our burnout in hustle culture, and our obsession with being special. It's easy to reduce the ego to a caricature of arrogance, self centeredness, or insecurity. But what if this is a misdiagnosis? What if the ego is not the enemy, but a misunderstood psychological structure trying to ensure our survival, belonging, and significance? What if, beneath all its loudness and drama, the ego just wants to be seen? Today, we explore the ego through a more compassionate and psychologically grounded lens, rooted in both ancient spiritual insight and contemporary mental health science. Psychologically speaking, the ego is our sense of identity, our I. It starts developing in early childhood as we separate from the caregiver and try to understand who we are in relation to others and the world. As we grow, the ego becomes the manager of our persona, the version of ourselves that we present to the world in order to be accepted. This isn't inherently bad. In fact, the ego is necessary. Without it, we wouldn't know where we end and others begin. We wouldn't be able to advocate for ourselves, take responsibility, or navigate society. But here's the catch: the ego builds itself by collecting strategies for survival, especially in response to pain. A child who feels unseen may grow up to become a performer, a perfectionist, or an overachiever. A teen who's bullied may build a tough, sarcastic interior. These are not flaws, they're defenses. This is where the psychological concept of the inner child becomes important. The ego often carries the voice of the wounded child within us, still longing to be loved, to be enough, to belong. You scroll through someone's perfectly curated life: Bali sunsets, gym selfies, deep quotes and captions. You feel inadequate. But chances are that person isn't showcasing their real self. They are broadcasting a persona, what Carl Jung would describe as the mask we wear to fit into society. Their ego is not acting out of arrogance, but often out of insecurity or a need for affirmation. This is what psychologists call narcissistic wounding. Not full blown narcissism, but a fragile, self needing external validation to feel real. I'll rest when I've made it. This belief, rampant in startup and freelance culture, is ego in overdrive. When we equate productivity with self worth, we are driven by ego that believes rest is laziness, presence is a threat to relevance. But under this drive is often an old wound: I must perform to be loved. X is a new battleground for egos. The urge to win debates, cancel others, or drop truth bombs often arises not from logic, but from a fear of being unseen, unheard, or invalidated. The ego fights not to be right, but to be recognized. Ironically, even spiritual circles aren't free from ego dynamics. There's kind of an ego trap where people start to identify with their spirituality. I have done shadow work. I have transcended. I have left my ego behind. This is what psychologists call spiritual bypassing, the use of spiritual practices to avoid emotional wounds. The person hasn't transcended their ego, they've just created a new one that wears mala beads and coats Eckhart Tolle. Real spiritual growth is not about eliminating the ego, it's about disidentifying from it. You stop mistaking it for your whole self. Instead, you notice it, hold it, even love it, without letting it run the show. This is the essence of mindfulness, witnessing without reacting, becoming the observer of your inner landscape, seeing the ego not as a demon to defeat, but as a child to understand. In trauma therapy and deep psychology, there's a powerful concept called reparenting, offering yourself the care, validation, and boundaries that you didn't receive when you were younger. The same can be applied to the ego. Your ego doesn't need exile, it needs reparenting. It needs someone to say, I see you, I see you're scared. You don't have to prove yourself. It's okay to feel small sometimes. When we give the ego this kind of relational safety, we perform what some call inner integration. This is not about killing off parts of yourself, but bringing them back into wholeness. The psychologist Richard Schwartz, creator of internal family systems, calls this the process of becoming self led, where the wise, calm center of your being lovingly relates to all the inner parts, including the ego. When seen and held, the ego doesn't disappear, but it softens. The integrated ego knows it's not all of who you are. It learns to step aside when the moment calls for vulnerability or silence. It becomes a useful tool instead of being a tyrannical master. This is the ego that writes books without craving fame, that builds businesses rooted in service, that sets boundaries without being brittle. It is self aware, not absorbed. In Vedant, there is a beautiful term, ahankar, the sense of I, or the egoic identity. Traditional texts do not treat it as evil, but as a function of Maya, the illusion, necessary for participation in worldly life. Enlightenment is not about erasing ahankar, but realizing your true self is beyond it, the witness. The ego is not the villain of your story. It's the scared child backstage, desperately hoping the spotlight will find it, not for applause, but for acknowledgement. And so, the most radical thing you can do is see it. Not analyze it to death, not shame it, not pretend you have outgrown it. Just see it, stay with it, breathe into it. Because the moment you witness your ego without judgment is the moment it no longer needs to scream. The ego is not the enemy, it just wants to be seen.